Our next speaker is Toni Toelle, and Toni is both incredibly dear and close friend, as well as a former colleague that I used to work with when I was a biologist with the U.S. Forest Service. Toni was born and raised in Oregon, working for various ranchers, moving cows and working in the hay fields. She's been employed by the U.S. Forest Service for the past 25 plus years, working in both fire and fuels management in Oregon, Arizona, and Colorado. Her career began as a seasonal wildland firefighter, working her way up to engine captain and then assistant fire management officer. Many of her years were spent fighting fires and prescribed burning on the districts, and she also filled in part-time on the Flagstaff hotshot crew. In 2009, she moved to Northwest Colorado, where she currently works for the White River National Forest as the zone's fuels specialist on the Blanco and Rifle Ranger districts. She is a proponent of prescribed fire and is responsible for all the prescribed burning and mechanical fuels projects on the districts, as well as assisting with many others on the Upper Colorado Fire Management Unit. In addition to her fire and fuels duties, she serves on multiple incident management teams for wildland fire suppression, both within our region here and nationwide. One of her main positions is as a safety officer. She's an avid outdoors woman in both her professional and personal life, and it is with the deepest appreciation that I welcome Toni Toelle to come and speak with you.
All right, well, I feel rather humbled to be here, to be honest with you. I'm following some pretty amazing people, and looking at the folks out here in the audience, a lot of folks that have been dealing with a lot of things. The one thing that I'm here to speak about is basically being the poster child for the person that has exposure to this type of illness that people are dealing with now. Now, if I can figure out how to work the clicker here. All right, I didn't get any technical aid here, Monica. Sorry about that.
Technical aid's rented.
Yeah. Okay, there it goes. I apologize. So you're probably wondering, why am I here today? Well, one of my big reasons for coming is to support an amazing friend and her family who were fairly recently diagnosed with Lyme and some of the other illnesses associated with it. She had a long road with many struggles, and what was even more amazing was the fact that the entire family went through symptoms and were later diagnosed. To me, that's a pretty amazing journey, and I'm really honored to be here with folks that are learning about that, and that we're having options, you know, to improve on that. So Monica, this one's for you, gal. So what I came here to speak about was primarily to provide a heightened awareness for outdoor workers. Those that don't work outdoors still have plenty of opportunities for exposure just by virtue of being pet owners, of having livestock, of recreating, you know, all the things that many of us enjoy here in the state of Colorado. So little bit of twist on mine is for those of us that have these outdoor jobs, does your employer provide you with tick awareness? Do you get any training? Do you know how to deal with it when you're exposed to it? When can you be exposed? When are the peak times, you know, that the little critters really like to come and visit you? Where can you be exposed? Who are most at risk? I've kind of enjoyed following the speaker before me because he used a lot of fire words, you know, smoldering and fire, so that was a perfect lead-in. Thank you very much. What are the possible symptoms? I'll tell you what, before coming to do this presentation, it forced me to do some research and learn so much that I'm going to do a little different with how I approach things outside, and what I hope to do as a safety officer on an incident management team to help with tick avoidance. We'll go a little bit into prevention measures, and then since I'm not a specialist or a veterinarian, we're just going to talk about some simple prevention measures for pets, livestock, and then for those who are avid hunters or fishermen, the potential for exposure and what you can do to prevent that. So just so you guys all know, I'm following some pretty amazing people with, they are disease specialists, That is not my specialty. Basically, as I said, I'm the poster girl for probably doing everything wrong in my profession, and have come a long ways in learning how to prevent stuff now. Monica mentioned I'm an employee of the U.S. Forest Service, and my primary job is outside, so I have a lot of opportunity as a firefighter, as a prescribed fuel specialist for encounters. And just by virtue of being an outdoorsman, we have that exposure as well. I've got some pretty good stories growing up in Eastern Oregon. My family raised sheep, and it was basically a competition kind of at the end of the day after being out with the livestock to count how many ticks you found on you, And probably a perfect example of how not to pull them off or deal with them was how I was raised. And before I get into my presentation, I was wondering if any of you guys could help me out with this. How many firefighters does it take to look for ticks? Well, if any of you know firefighters, we're a little hard-headed. We work long hours, we sleep on the ground, and sometimes we have competitions. I'm a little old and past that stage of my life now, but for not showering and doing all the preventative things. So, like I said, the poster child for what not to do. So just jumping in from my experience, and I don't know how many folks out there who have an outdoor profession have any kind of a, policy or procedure for dealing with tick exposure. Through the U.S. Forest Service, I worked in various states, and amazingly enough, all this time I've worked there, I have never had somebody sit down and say, this is how we're going to deal with it. This is what you need to do to prevent it. And if you do find a tick, this is what we're going to need to do to document it. None of that's been provided. Now, that's not true in other regions. There's some states, obviously, back east that have higher prevalence of ticks and exposure, and there are some protocols in place, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is how many of you, if you do work in the outside, have a policy that helps you? There's other agencies out there that probably don't have anything in place. So just something to kind of put at the forefront of your mind. So based off of that, what could you do? I mean, if you're still actively employed in the outdoors, for us, we follow a health and safety code handbook. We are government. We have lots of handbooks, so as you can imagine. Can you provide guidance? I'd say if you're not getting that guidance or direction, maybe you work closely with, a forest safety officer or whoever your employer is to maybe create a little bit. Also, within the federal government, we have these job hazard analysis. For everything we do, we're really supposed to be looking at the risk and coming up with a mitigation standard. And to be honest with you, of all the JHAs that I've gone through, I've never have used anything that has dealt with ticks or fleas or any of the potential bloodborne possibilities. So, like I said, I'm learning a lot from having to do a little research and be here. But what I'd like to put on the forefront of all your minds is what can you do if this is a job you do and you have those exposures? Of course, now, after hearing some of these amazing speakers and some of the causes, I'm going to take some of these practices, these new awarenesses back home with me, and hopefully for the folks that I work with, I'm going to put those into place and hopefully get support, to, encourage more of it out there. Another thing I had no idea, carry a tick removal kit. You might ask, what is a tick removal kit? Well, a very basic one is going to have fine tweezers with the little fine points on it. It's going to have some kind of soap or antiseptic. It's going to have a little container. I think the big thing that we're finding is, yes, you can possibly find some, a tick that's carrying something here in Colorado. Many of you travel around. You can take the tick and put it in the container with grass and get it tested. It's, these days it comes highly, suggested. If you do carry the tick removal kit, make sure that you research or get some advice on how to use it. I think that's another thing that I really didn't know. I've been removing ticks the wrong way for many years. So, and another good thing is to mention is now with the exposure is wearing disposable gloves. When you're removing a tick instead of just using your bare hand. You never know where that exposure is coming from for sure. Here's a good question. When can you encounter ticks? Colorado, especially where I'm from in Northwest Colorado, not much in the bug department starts moving until now. So for us working in the field, this is a really active time for ticks to be out. Primary places that we find them in Northwest Colorado would be, in brush fields, sagebrush, oak brush. But as many of you probably travel and recreate or work in other states, ticks can be active year-round. It kind of depends on their environment and where they're at. So kind of knowing that is very helpful. I stole this part of this information from a presentation Monica had, but what I wasn't aware of is that fall is usually another active time for ticks. Is they're trying to get their last good meals before possibly going into a dormant cycle, or however long they live, they could be dying. As we spoke about just a minute ago, where can you encounter ticks? Well, I learned some more about ticks is, I always knew that they were in the grass, brush. Usually could find them on livestock, on your pets. What I didn't know is that they can sense carbon dioxide. They can sense our breathing and then vibration, so they start moving to those areas. Kind of unnerving if you think about a tick being that smart. So they're opportunistic, as most parasites are. They usually wait on the end of the grasses or the shrubbery, and that's how they can attach to you. So areas of high risk are going to be, could even be your lawn, some of your shrubbery around your house, leaf litter, stone walls, wood piles, and that's just an example. So you're probably wondering who's most at risk. Basically, all of us that are active in the outdoors are at risk. Outdoor workers, of course, in construction, landscaping, forestry, firefighting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the list is long and many, and this doesn't near include all of them. We're more prone to exposure just by virtue of what we enjoy to do. Other risks include, but are not limited to, joggers, hikers, et cetera. I mean, just as I mentioned before, we're here in Colorado for a reason, because we enjoy the outdoors. What are some excessive exposures? Well, I mentioned it a little bit before. Firefighters are a perfect example by virtue of our increased exposure. We're out there a lot of times. We sleep on the ground. That's a good way to come in contact with them. Sleep in rustic facilities. And going days without showers. Probably another good reason why firefighting profession needs to probably change their ways a little bit. And I think we have come a long ways in the 20 plus years I've been doing it. Traveling to regions where risks are greater or are unknown, and I think the unknown is probably a bigger thing, to be honest with you. If you come from states that haven't had as much exposure, or you haven't had to think about it, and then you go somewhere on a fire assignment or from some other type of assignment, all of a sudden you're dealing with an issue that you're probably not prepared to deal with. And ticks are pretty opportunistic. They may hitchhike home with you, and you may bring them into your home to affect other members in your family. And of course, your pets, your livestock, horses, they can bring that to you as well. So just something to think about. And I was looking to try to put some humor in this. I like to go camping. They said it'll be fun, and then the big old spider on there. That tends to happen more often than not. So, risk of the disease. I'm not going to go in detail on this because you've seen some very good presentations and that's their expertise. But, just if you are starting to have any of these, please, you know, so many times we've been told to take a aspirin and go home. In my profession, that's pretty typical. Well, there could be a lot more going on, so taking the advice of some of the speakers that have presented before, don't be afraid to look for somebody that can help you diagnose this. And you know, the amazing thing that I learned is the number of diseases that that little bug can carry. You know, I always have heard of Lyme's. I did not understand, you know, I've heard of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I've heard of Colorado tick fever. But if you go down this list, there are so many ailments that these bugs can, you know, carry. So going back to the prevention theme, we'll get into that here in a minute. Really, for me, jumped out as a reason why we need to do a better job of prevention with our exposure. There's another slide that I borrowed from Monica. She had done a presentation for a fire refresher for a group of firefighters in Salida, and I thought there were some really good points on here. So what do we have in Colorado? We have the Rocky Mountain wood tick, the American dog tick. They're most common ticks associated with people. What can we get here? We can get Colorado tick fever. Is probably one of the most common transmitted diseases in the region. Well, right here there's maybe a little controversy. No human case of Lyme diseases are reported to have originated in Colorado by the CDC, but I think we're learning from previous presentations that there's a possibility that the research just wasn't there until now, and we're seeing the obvious signs of you know, that. Tick-borne relapsing fever. You know, and there's some other things here, you know, diseases that I obviously couldn't pronounce because I don't have a you know, degree as a doctor. So it was really something that, you know, kind of took my awareness to a whole nother level when I started going through this, to be honest with you. So based off of all that, you know, how do we help those who work in the woods? And recreationists? How can we maybe discourage or, you know, prevent some of this? Well, there's some suggestions where light-colored clothing. Well, in my profession, my clothing comes in green and yellow with the Nomex that we're provided, so that's probably not an option, but probably something considering. You know, the reason why they say the light-colored clothing is if you have a tick on you, it's more obvious. It's easier to detect before they become attached. So wearing long-sleeve shirts and pants. You can see the example of the boots down here where they've tucked their pant legs into their socks. You know, it's definitely an option. It just keeps the opportunity of exposure down. There was a strong recommendation for using insect repellents. Containing 20 to 30% DEET. Well, it kind of has a twofold thing here. You know, what we found as firefighters is you carry bug spray with DEET in your fire pack. If your bug spray is open, it literally dissolves the side of your pack. So being aware of the DEET itself is something that you guys need to make a determination on, even though it's the best preventative out there. You know, what are the trade-offs for that? Other uses of repellents, you know, where they talked about the treated clothing with the permethrin. You know, this example showing using the spray on the clothing, but just looking in, you know, some of the literature that's provided here, there's companies now making it and even fire-resistant treated clothing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Hasn't been approved for us on our, you know, working for the Forest Service or on the fire line yet, but that might be something that would be definitely worth looking into. Here's just some examples of what you might find out there. Probably, you know, buy this at Walmart. You might buy at most, you know, hunting, fishing, you know, stores, places like that. But the key thing that they were going back to the slide before was make sure it has a sufficient amount of DEET and probably is one of these more prominent labels. I know this is a busy slide, but this just goes to the point of if you're going to use those chemicals, there are places to learn about them, effectiveness and you know, sensitivities and all that. So definitely worth a quick look before you use it. So you're probably wondering, okay, there's a little bit of prevention, but how else can I decrease my exposure? I mean, if you don't want to come and, you know, for those that have a frequent contact with them, well, do a tick check. You know, do it daily. Do it at the end of the day when you're done with your run, when you come back from, you know, from your hike. You know, it's highly encouraged to, and evidently it is very efficient. The more you do this, it is a very efficient way to, you know, lessen the potential for, you know, the exposure. There's a lot of good places to look for too. Look inside behind your ears. You know, they like to hide. A lot of them, you know, you'll find them at your hairline, so the base of your skull, back of your neck, under your arms, in your groin, behind your knees, in your belly button. This makes me crawl thinking about it. So definitely worth it. I just was outside yesterday, and the whole day I felt like I was ticky, because this is all I've been thinking about was tick prevention. So I definitely recommend doing it daily. And with the tick removal theme, lowering the risk, yeah, going back to carrying a tick removal kit. You know, you can obviously put your own together. Anytime you're obviously removing the tick before it comes attached is better, but when it is, then we'll go into here in a minute proper removal of the tick. There's a lot of ways not to remove a tick, and I could probably show you every one of them, being that I've done that. You know, you've always heard the, you know, oh yeah, use a cotton ball that's been smothered with Vaseline, or light it with a lighter, or just yank it out with your hand. Well, that's pretty old school. Definitely doesn't come recommended. Some of the do-it-yourself tick kits, as I mentioned, are, you know, definitely get the really fine-tip tweezers. There's even tick pullers. They're kind of L-shaped looking things. I didn't have much information on them, and so I can't really speak to proper use, but it's going to be real similar to the example of what to do here when we come up on the next slide or two. The key thing being, try not to touch it with your, you know, unexposed, with your hand. Put some gloves on. You know, if you're going to be removing it, and that tick is infected with something, there's some chance that even though it may not get transmitted through the bite, you may get some of that on you. So just some tips to follow. Okay, and I put two examples here because the better picture over here on the right showed grabbing it, but what it failed to show for pulling a tick is always pull it straight up. I've heard a couple different things on, you know, when you get the tick, to pull it until your skin is just, sorry, doing something here, slightly tight, and give it a second, and then the tick, you know, will just get tired of its head being pulled on, and it will release. What you really want to try to avoid is having the tick have the ability to regurgitate its contents back into your system, or leave its head in there, because you're just, you know, increasing that exposure. So the straight up, in a way. One thing, you know, that we're starting to recommend now, and I'm going to take this back with me to my agency, is, you know, if we find an employee that has a tick on them, even before they possibly present with the bullseye or the rash, is to save the tick. So coming up with some containers and the grass to keep it alive, and sending it to the appropriate places. Monica had a recommendation here. Bay Area Lyme Foundation is now offering free tick testing for 6 of the pathogens through the University of Northern Arizona. So just another option out there. So I think that was one big take-home message to me that I had never thought about. And as a safety officer on an incident management team, I'm going to see if we can start doing more with this to make it more of a policy for us if we have folks come in that have been bitten by ticks. So what about your pets? If we can be exposed to ticks, you know, your dog, your cat, you know, your favorite critter that goes with you on the hike, or hangs out on the lawn all day and then comes in to visit you in the evening when you come home from work, they need to have that tick check too, because you know, it's not just for their welfare. They have a real potential to carry that into your home, especially if they're spoiled like my dogs and are allowed to get on your bed or your couch or places that you probably shouldn't be. But they kind of rule my house too. So there are means to, you know, it's not as easy to see on an animal, but I've seen ticks and pretty aggressive tick, you know, little lumps and larvae thing looking here, kind of reactions around the ears. That's pretty common on dogs and cats. So do that check with them. Other recommendations is if your pets don't rule your house is to keep them off your furniture and especially your bedding, because you're really increasing your potential for exposure. Designate sleeping areas for your pets and check their bedding routinely. So that's kind of a take-home message for me too. Recommendations is to vacuum their bedding frequently, the carpeting, furniture where they frequent, and dispose of the vacuum bag in an outdoor sealed receptacle to prevent them, you know, if there is tick exposure to, you know, so that's taken away from you and your house. So if there's tick control products for people, well, you know, it goes to reason that there's products for your pets as well. And I'm not going to recommend any. I think we have a gentleman or somebody following who's a veterinarian that would probably be the person to speak to that. But definitely I would suggest, you know, if your animal is, you know, with you a lot and you're going to be outside a lot, is look for some of those tick prevention measures. I thought this little cartoon was pretty cute because some of us would probably take this to the extreme now after we're being this increased awareness. I know that's kind of where I'm at right now, learning all this stuff. So, and then just a reminder too, exposing your pet to more than one type of treatment within a short period of time is probably not advisable unless this is a recommendation of your veterinarian. So please seek that advice from them. So it comes to mind, it's, you know, can horses get ticks and have tick-related illnesses? Yeah, I've seen them mainly, you know, from growing up on a ranch in eastern Oregon. I've seen less of it here in Colorado and in Arizona where I lived prior. I was just home visiting my parents, and my mom had a horse that presented with something similar to the picture on the chest there, only her horse had evidently had a tick bite and was back towards her udder underneath. So definitely just a reminder that, yeah, our livestock, our horses, can definitely be exposed to not just the tick, but, you know, there's a list of, you know, diseases that our livestock can, you know, get from a tick bite as well. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but anaplasmosis is a tick-transmitted disease. It's just an example I wanted to throw out there. It's one of the things about this is that, as in with people, if this goes untreated, you know, it can lead to death in livestock too. So pretty important to know if you're starting to see these things, that it's worth definitely getting your animals checked up. And you know, if you find ticks and you are, you know, starting to see, you know, with this tick awareness and you have a concern, you can test ticks off of livestock as well. Similar procedures as humans. So if you have those concerns, think about that. Just real quick with symptoms of anaplasmosis, you know, you get a fever, you get small hemorrhages, similar to the picture we saw previous. Hemorrhages on the mucous membranes in the nose, the mouth, the eyes. And it goes into, you know, digestive tract pain. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because, like I said, I think we have a gentleman following who has a lot more expertise, but I just thought it was something that's probably overlooked a lot by most of us that are pet and livestock owners. So when in doubt, if you're starting to see some of these symptoms, I highly advise getting them looked at. And looking at the slide you presented, I think, what was it, the exposure, the really highlighted stuff in northwest Colorado is right on the edge of Moffett and Rio Blanco County where I work and live. So increased awareness, if any, you know, to look at these sites to where, you know, animals might be starting to encounter issues like that too. That was very educational for me. Treatments, as I said, the disease can be fatal if not treated, and as you know, previously stated for humans, antibiotic treatments is what, you know, the veterinarians would use to deal with this. So just very, very enlightening for me. There's treatments for Lyme's in horses. I had no idea that horses, you know, non-ruminant animals could get this. So again, seek, if you're having issues or symptoms similar to that, make sure you're going and getting them looked. Prevention measures for livestock are the same as for, you know, yourself. Looking for ticks and removing them, but remove them properly, now that I've learned that. And disposing of them is another big thing. You know, when you pull ticks, put them in a plastic bag and seal it with tape and dispose of it properly, so, you know, the tick doesn't have the ability to go back out and re-expose something. So preventative measures, another one of those cartoons I thought was pretty hilarious now that all I think about is ticks. So becoming tick vigilant. I mean, this isn't just for livestock, it's for your pets. If you have brush around your home or your, you know, your pasture where you're grazing, removing some of that. I know they go into recommendations of maybe even mowing, but if I mow my fields and my horses wouldn't have anything to eat, so probably not going to happen in my case, but something to be aware of. And of course, using insecticides with animals just as in humans. Another interesting thing that I never really thought about is ticks, you know, affect wildlife too. You know, and they're not discretionary on, you know, domestics, wildlife, ruminants, which is the four-stomached animals, you know, like cattle, sheep, goats, elk, deer, bison, antelope, can affect non-rumans, you know. I mean, they affect anything, coyotes, kind of interesting, you know, you just don't usually think about that kind of exposure. So what does that mean? Well, whoops, I kind of messed up my slide there, but for those of us that are hunters, you know, that are active in the outdoors, don't really think about that, but ticks like to, you know, they're looking for a host. They're a pretty handy host as well. So, you know, just being aware and following the same thing that you would for tick removal, or, you know, working around your animals, you know, or as a recreationist. One thing that I know that we typically do, you know, just in Northwest Colorado, we have chronic wasting disease, so we typically, you know, when we're hunting and, you know, skinning or processing, is we use gloves. Well, it's probably a good thing, and it may have helped us with the tick exposure, and we didn't even know it. So just another good idea there. And then also a recommendation, and Monica had given me this hint that her and Andy now, with their game meat, they cook it a little longer, just to make sure that they're not eating rare or, you know, uncooked meats, because of the potential for stuff to, you know, be transmitted, you know, through the blood. So really got me thinking, and I hope that this presentation, and, you know, I know it's completely different from the other presenters, but maybe makes you think a little bit about how you're going to maybe prevent exposure for yourself or your, you know, your family, your grandkids, whoever that may be out there. And there's so many things that you can be exposed to, which is pretty amazing. So I thought some of these slides were pretty handy, especially the monkey picking the bugs off of the dog. That may be what firefighters need to go to if we don't improve our process. So anyway, I hope this gave you guys a little bit of an eye-opener like it did me. Just happened to do this research, and again, I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm learning amazing things just listening to the folks that are here. So thank you very much.